Dr. Jerome Hurst, brother from another mother. Look at my brother holding it down.
How you
The
doing there, Brother
community,
Woods?
the community service and Parle director for Allegheny West Conference, senior pastor at Ethnon Temple in Pittsburgh and Wilkerson, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, and the CJC vice chairperson. Ladies and gentlemen, this brother is the contemporary pioneer of justice in the church and making sure people are engaged in their community. He is a wealth of fresh air and a wealth of talent. And we're happy having him come in and co-host with us this evening. The legendary, an educator in his own right as well, having formerly served as superintendent of education for the Allegheny West Conference. So, Dr. Hurst, welcome to the broadcast. Thank you so much for helping us out today.
Glad I could be here. We're just excited about what's been going on all month long here at this channel. For all of you who have been coming in Friday night after Friday night, we appreciate it that we have been able to grasp your attention and give you some just your thought pattern, what you're thinking, and all of that. I want to thank Elder Woods, our fearless leader, for just keeping us going and making us understand the importance of us being relevant to the times in which we are. So we're looking forward to having a great show tonight. We have some wonderful panelists, and I'm sure they're going to provoke our thought tonight.
Well, we're always happy to have our panelists. Our theme tonight, are Blacks visible in America and the church? America as being our country and the church as a whole, not a particular denomination, although all of us are members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We're really focusing on the church, and we may even hit our own denomination as well. But I'm very happy to have our distinguished guest with us this evening. Claudia Allen serves as the executive director of Adventist Peace Fellowship. Keith Burton has Life Empowerment. Timothy Golden has a visiting professor of philosophy at Whitman College. And Olive Hemmings is the professor at the theology department, I should say the departmental chairperson at Washington Adventist University, specializing in New Testament. We have a star-studded cast today. And so we want to invite you, your family, your friends, and your foes to come join us as we celebrate a century of Black history commemorations, preserve, promote, and protect. Without further ado, let's bring our distinguished panelists on board. We love each and every one of them, and we're going to turn them loose as they always do, and they always will, as we talk about our topic today, are Blacks visible in America and the church. And we just want you to provide an opening 3 minutes with regards to a response to that question. And then we'll go from there. As always, with our listening audience, please feel free to put your comments in the chat, and we will get to them as we can throughout the broadcast. But once again, this show is dedicated to everyone who has given their life, sacrifice, as relates to the freedoms that we have today, and also in commemoration of Black History Month. So without further ado, we'll start with Claudia Allen. Are Blacks visible in America and the church?
I desperately did not want to go first. What a question. I think that it begins, it depends on several things. I think that it depends on the denomination. I think it depends on what do you mean, who are you talking about when you say Blacks? So I think that it just depends on a variety of things, and I look forward to the ways that we'll kind of like clarify and define that question even further.
Tim Golden.
Well, thank you, Woody, for assembling this panel. I'm always blessed to be among my very prestigious colleagues here, and I want to just say a word about the importance of Black history. We are Christians. Christians the central teaching of our religion is that we serve a God who cares so much about history that he entered it in order to save us. The eternal became historical in the person of Jesus Christ for our salvation. And so, since we can emulate God, any theology or politics that ignores history is antithetical to the nature of the Christian gospel, to the core of the Christian gospel. So I just wanted to say that about the importance of history, and in particular Black history. I've always thought that the question of Black visibility is complex. I think in certain ways, Black people are highly visible. And when I say Black people, to Claudia Allen's point, it's important to clarify what we mean. But for me, I mean African Americans, Afro Caribbeans, and Africans collectively together, and we can distinguish them within the rubric of, or within the framework of Black. We can make those cultural distinctions. But when I say Black people, that's what I mean very broadly. I think Black people have always been visible in some ways and not visible in others. We have been visible as objects, but invisible as subjects. We are visible perhaps as entertainers. We are not visible as intellectuals. We are visible as people who perform in the church, but we are not visible as church members who have legitimate spiritual and moral concerns about the world. The church, in some sense, loves Black music, but does not like Black people. And we have a habit sometimes of seeing Black people in some ways and not seeing them in other ways. And I think the aim, that the aim and the struggle of Black people is to become visible across the board. And to date, we have not done that because our intellects are not respected, but our singing voices are. And I'm not trying to diminish entertainment or sports. I'm just saying there are modes of visibility that we have yet to attain. And I think that's an integral part of our struggle as Black people.
Thank you. Olive Hemmings, Doctor.
Yeah, it all depends on what we're talking about when we're talking about visibility. Because first and foremost, it's a truism in American history that the Black church is the conscience of America. Is that visibility? Let us not forget that when Dietrich Bonhoeffer left Germany and came to New York looking for a theology to go back to Germany and address the Nazi regime, he did not find that theology in the white church. He found it in the Black church. Let us not forget that the greatest movement for liberation in this country was a Black civil rights movement that was not only liberating for Black people, but liberating for all people. Laws were passed that were liberating not just for Black people, but for all minorities and people who are vulnerable in this country. And I find that if we really stop to look at it, the Black experience is profound. As I say, it's so profound that the Black church is called the conscience of America. The problem is that today there is a regime that is trying to bury that history, to hide from it, to make us invisible. And I want to say here, friends, that the fact that they're trying so hard to bury us is going to make us even more visible. If that is what we call visibility, if visibility is Black fashion, Black beauty, Black don't crack, if visibility is, is the culture, African American culture. What would America be without African American culture? Well, as you say, Tim, they like our music and whatnot. They not necessarily like us. But even in the current situation where we have people marching on the street and protesting ICE, and Black people decide we're going to sit this one out, it's a loud sitting out. People are hearing it. Where are the Black? Why we haven't seen them? So I would say that Black people are very much visible, and the thing is, even though there is an attempt to make us invisible, I don't know how successful that can be. That's what I have to say on that.
Keato Yabegna?
I guess that's me.
Yes, sir, Keith. Come on, Doc.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so I'm thinking about Ralph Ellison's novel, The Invisible Man. And he basically tells the story of the African in the Americas who is seen but is not seen. And I think about the African in the Americas as one who is seen and not seen. Is seen in the sense that the tinge of our skin is seen as a virus, but is not seen in that our voice is often not heard. And I believe when we look at it in the church, and let me come right home to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, look at the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Blacks are seen as it relates to the narrative of success. When we look at 53% of the church's membership being housed on the African continent, another 40-something% being in the Americas, the majority of the Seventh-day Adventist Church now is indeed Black and brown. However, even though we see the numbers, we are not seen. We are not seen in the hymnal. We are not seen in the teams that put together the Sabbath School quarterlies. We are not seen as it relates to the material that we are fed, that as ministers we're supposed to pass on. And I'm thinking specifically about our understanding of prophecy, Revelation chapter 13 specifically, where we didn't see the plight of the Black man, the Black woman in the Americas, but instead when we look for the mark of the beast, we take a look at a future Sabbath Sunday showdown rather than looking at the white supremacy that could very well have been seen by anyone who was looking at the way in which Europeans have been continuously oppressing Black and brown people. And by the way, even from an exegetical perspective, if we look at that vicarious filia Dei, or rather the 666, it very well fits the Greek spelling of Latinos, which refers to Roman. So we don't have to go to the Pope to see an application if we wanted to stay historicist in the way in which we applied. And so, yes, as it relates to numbers, there is a pretense of sight, but in reality, as it relates to the doctrine, Adventist culture, we are unseen, and there is no indication that anyone even wants to start seeing us.
Can we go back to Claudia? I want to come back to you and maybe help us. I want you to help us to, I think we need to define what visibility is. Is it culturally? Are we talking culturally? Are we talking politically? Spiritually? Is visibility, when you hear that, are Blacks visible in the church or the world, Claudia? Is it about representation or influence? Is it about access or is it about authority? Is it about being included or is it about being centered? What when you hear that question, what's the first thing? When you hear that word visibility, what comes to your mind, Claudia?
I thank you for that, Pastor Hurst. I think, I'm struggling with the question because of all the things that you just said. I think that when I think of visibility, I think that oftentimes we relegate Black people to a performance. And so there are a lot of Black people who are on stages. There are a lot of Black people in positions and that are seen. But just because you are seen does not mean that you are included. Just because you are seen doesn't mean you have any power. Just because you are seen doesn't mean that anything that you value is being considered. In fact, you really could just be a token. You really could just be a performance prop to communicate that we are for Black people and Blackness, when in actuality, you are not. And I think that's what I see a lot of times is there is a kind of pandering to representation that many of us have settled for, seeing ourselves. And seeing ourselves has not always brought the power, inclusion, or accessibility that we are actually requesting. And, this is why I think that there are so many situations where, you can say, all skin folk ain't kinfolk, right? Because you can have a Black elected official, and that does not mean that Black affairs are being drawn up in policy or moved forward. You can have a Black conference president, and that does not mean that the needs, the spiritual and socio-political needs of Black people are being considered or addressed in our churches or within our administrative spaces. And so I guess I'm at a point where I'm not interested in us being visible. If anything, like, I feel as though there are some private rooms that we don't have access to, that have no cameras and that are not seen. And I'm wondering, what does it look like for Black people who want to do real organizational change to get access to those invisible rooms?
Yes, thank you. So access and authority, even in those rooms, and having a voice. Anyone else want to speak to that before we?
Can I, as a segue a little bit on that, just to mention, even the current, what I would say, I think there's still a hangover from the Charlie Kirk situation, where if we're talking about being heard as also being seen, where we hear white leaders valorizing this person, forgetting and not even paying attention to the kind of trauma his rhetoric has inflicted upon Black people and Black people in this church. And it's as though it did not matter. Many articles went out from Blacks talking about it. Is it that they didn't hear us? Isn't that they didn't see? Or is it that they did not care? That they continue to valorize him and to peddle his book, pseudo Sabbath book. So that Dr. Hurst troubles me, that white leaders in our church do not seem to mind our trauma.
Yeah, and Dr. Hemmons, as you raised that, I'm thinking about what took place at the BAFTA Awards this week with Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo. When the gentleman, I forget his name, he does have Tourette's syndrome, and he shouted the N-word not once but 3 times. BBC blocked other things out, like when one of the award recipients called for Palestine to be free, that was blocked out, but the N-word wasn't blocked out. And then when the quote-unquote explanation was given, it was prefaced with the words, "if anyone was offended." My goodness, someone says the N-word, and two Black men are on stage, and you're saying, "if anyone was offended." And that speaks to that invisibility again, because there is this hubris that basically denies the validity of Black humanity, where they can say with a straight face, if anyone was offended, where they could cut out that piece which talks about people being free in Palestine, but feel it's perfectly okay to have the words of this person. And again, he has a condition, and whether it's something that was involuntary or not, I guess that's going to be debated forever. We don't know, but we do know that that word is offensive, not potentially offensive, is offensive. And we also know that the BBC made a choice. And I think they did that because of this notion that Blacks are somehow invisible, Blacks somehow lack feeling, Blacks are somehow...
Could you be quiet inside there? I'm on a podcast.
Okay, yeah.
Say, I'm sorry, Keith, were you done?
Yeah. Actually, yeah. Yes, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. I was just going to make the point along these lines that the difference between being visible and being seen is like the difference between someone hearing you and someone listening to you. To be heard is to have an auditory sensation that has an outcome right in your ear. I can hear you talking, but if I'm going to really respect your humanity, I am going to listen to what you are saying, because as a human being, certainly operating within the Christian tradition, if I'm going to love my neighbor, right, I have to not just hear what my neighbor is saying, I have to listen, because it's through listening that will lead to some type of meaningful moral action in love for the benefit of my neighbor. So we can see Black people. I mean, Black people can be visible across the globe, right? In African countries, in Caribbean countries, here in the United States, Black people can be visible as sites of financial support for the denomination, right? As sites of tithe or offering. But Black people are not seen as human beings. As human beings, like what Keith just pointed out, as human beings that actually would understandably be offended, such that you wouldn't have to qualify an apology with a conditional, right? I mean, to use that word when two of the most accomplished actors, right, two of our community's brightest stars in terms of their performative art and what they do, what they've done on Delroy Lindo, my goodness, his work on Broadway, his work on stage and screen, Michael B. Jordan. I mean, it's just, if the best of us is going to be insulted in that way, then what does that say for all of us, especially when an apology is qualified with a conditional? So if we are going to sort of understand where we are right now, we understand, like I said, that Black people are visible as objects, but Black people are not seen as subjects. And I think that's the real problem.
So I want to respond to this. Something has come to my mind as you all are talking. I think the other reason why I said it depends in my opening statement is because I do believe that Blacks are visible in other denominations. And so that's why I also don't necessarily want us to have like a general conversation about a general church, because I think that There are other denominations to whom or where this is not an issue, and particularly historically Black churches and denominations. And so we happen to be a historically white denomination that has Black churches within it. But there is a historic Black church. And I think that the historic Black church is still visible and is still a powerful entity and influence throughout the country. And so I think it's important for us to make that distinction. I think that said, one of the other reasons why I agree with so much of what you all have been saying, particularly around the invisibility of Black people within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, really kind of comes down to the fact that the Seventh-day Adventist Church does not celebrate difference as a global denomination. I believe that one of the greatest disappointments that I've observed is the Parade of Nations every GC session. I'm sure many will disagree with me on this, but I strongly dislike how we grab people from all of the corners of the world, encourage them to don their apparel, and then parade them out with their flags. Yet throughout the general conference session, when they come up to perform or to participate musically in worship, they are not singing in their native tongues, and they are singing in ways that are extremely European-centric. And so why in the world am I watching an Indonesian group in Indonesian garb singing in white styles of worship? Why in the world am I watching Africans and Caribbeans from all over the world don outfits almost to pander to a fake kind of multiculturalism that does not actually celebrate them getting up there and singing in Swahili or playing the steel pan? I would appreciate more if the church genuinely celebrated our differences. But because they don't do that, what we're having is a kind of tokenism where Adventists around the world are having to put on what Frantz Fanon would call black skin and white masks. And you have people who are performing a kind of white American Adventism that is calling them or asking them to sacrifice on the altar of being a part of a community of faith, aspects of their culture that are fundamentally not inherently problematic or demonic. And so I think in order for us to have a real conversation about, are Blacks visible in the church? I think the question could even be more narrowed. Are Black Americans visible in the church? Is that a conversation that we're ready and willing to have? I think that there's a lot that is like caught up in the question for me. And that's why I'm really kind of like, where are we going with it? Because there's a lot of directions that we can talk about that I think are all very valid and important. But I really feel as though Adventism is not a welcoming space for anyone who is not white and European. And that includes our Asian and even Latin brothers and sisters, even though that complicates the conversation significantly as well.
So if I could just follow through on that, I want to get myself into some trouble too. And in the spirit of John Lewis, it'll be good trouble, I promise. Our evangelism, the Adventist Church's evangelism, the global evangelism project, is beset by a mendacity that suppresses our critique of white supremacy in Revelation 13. And yes, it is a critique of white supremacy because the beast with lamb-like horns who spoke as a dragon represents a contradiction between what this beast would say and what this beast would actually do perform. And you can't get around that without reading Uriah Smith, one of the Advent founders, and his essay, The United States in Light of Prophecy. There, he is openly critical of Abraham Lincoln's emancipation of the slaves because it happened on the basis of political expediency and not moral righteousness. And so we put Doug Batchelor and Mark Finley in Southeast Asia, and they preach and they evangelize people, and they completely omit the parts of Adventism that are endemic to the United States. And an integral part of that, I mean, let's face it, Seventh-day Adventism is an American denomination. It's part of the Second Great Religious Awakening, and you can't get around the Americanness of Adventism. And so what do? We go and we preach an ersatz version of the gospel that completely ignores history, and then immigrants come to the United States, and because they've seen Doug Batchelor and Mark Finley, they are conditioned to position themselves in as close a proximity to whites as possible. So when you come to the United States and you interact with African Americans, you are totally oblivious to their history. I spoke at a church for Religious Liberty Sabbath in January, and it was a church that's primarily African and Caribbean. And it was amazing to me of how when I preached my sermon, I tried to tell them that the most compelling scripture in the Bible to me is Esther 7, verse 10, which says that Haman was hung on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. So there are a lot of people in this political moment who voted for the current administration based on the self-righteous idea that President Trump was going to do things for everybody else, that I'm here legally. He's not going to deport me. He's not going to deport my family. And yet it turned out that when you voted for this administration in the last presidential election, you are now being hung on the gallows that you thought were only going to apply to everybody else. And so now you have immigrants in the church saying, African immigrants in the church saying things to me like, oh my goodness, they're treating me like I'm Black. Yeah. And you're being treated like you're Black. And it's surprising to them. But the reason it's surprising is because we are so dishonest with our global evangelism, and that dishonesty emerges from a kind of white guilt that is trying to suppress history because it doesn't want to address the church's complicity in the maintenance of white supremacy. A lot of our white brethren love the country, America, more than they love God. And rather than say anything bad about the United States, or that could be perceived as bad, they suppress that history. But again, if you're going to be like Christ, who entered history in order to save us, we can't ignore it and expect to bear his image.
Yeah. You know, as I think about this conversation, my mind goes to Tanya Hernandez's book, Racial Innocence, where she speaks about the concept that we find in Luso and Hispanic cultures of what they call blanqueamiento. And that has to do with, whitening. So when we think of Brazil, for instance, there were 20 million enslaved people taken to Brazil as opposed to only 600,000 taken to North America. And we see that there is policy. There has been policy, government policy in Brazil, in Puerto Rico, in Cuba, and other places to whiten the race. They call it improving the race, right? And so we see this diminishing of the Black phenotypical, the strong Black phenotypical expression, because there is this effort to change that physiology. However, what the English have done, they're saying, hey, we're going to get the mind. We're going to get the mind. We are going to whiten the mind. And when the mind is whitened, then the deceived, those who believe somehow that whiteness has some sacredness to it, now become the staunchest defenders of white supremacy. And so some of the strongest defenders of white supremacy are folk who have Black skin, because somehow that Black skin is whitened by their proximity to whiteness. And so there's a pathology that I know my good friend, Dr. Jerome Crichton writes about, that is deep, so much so that it doesn't only impact those who have bought into the myth of white supremacy, and it mirrors their own whiteness, but it's also captured the minds of many of us who have Black skin. And that, I believe, has been more effective than what the Portuguese and what the Spanish have done in trying to whiten the race by miscegenation. Because once you get the mind, the people are going to take their place in line, even as they allow those who pull the strings to operate with impunity.
I know that when we set this up, one of the things that Wood said, even from, that we wanted to look, it says, are the Blacks visible in the church in America. Tim made reference to Revelation. And so I want us to broaden to the Black church with what that Claudia mentioned, that there is a Black church. And so the question is, what is the Black church's prophetic alternative right now? What's our prophetic alternative? What does prophetic courage look like for us right now as we are talking about the issues that we are facing when it comes to Christian nationalism and DEI rollbacks and things like that? Maybe Dr. Hemmings, I'll start with you with that one. Unmute, Dr. Hemmings.
I think we need to stop playing with the three angels message of Revelation 14. Stop playing dogma with it. I think we need to start reading Revelation in context. That the prophet John addressed Babylon, empire, an oppressive and corrupt system, and an emperor who sets himself up as God, Savior. We need to begin now to bring that over to what is happening in American society. We need to understand, and I'm going to preach a sermon tomorrow, regarding John the Baptist's call from the wilderness to come. And when he called, some of the religious establishments were running to, and he says, "Who told you to flee from the wrath to come, you generation of viper?" I want you to invoke what Revelation says, to come out of my people, that you may not be partakers, all right? You may not receive the wrath of God to come out of her. Because having drunk of the wine of the wrath of her prostitution. What is happening today is that Christian nationalism has set itself up as an empire. We need to see that, an oppressive empire, because of the power brokering that has gone on between Christian nationalists and the current leader of America. He's not Christian. He does not claim to be Christian. His Christianity. So, and you have given, as I said last week, you have given the sacred text of Christianity to this person, an unrepentant liar, sexual abuser, fraudster, hedonist. You have taken our sacred text and give it to him to endorse.
Mm.
And then you continue to overlook a system of total, complete corruption
Mhm.
and continue to endorse that or be silent to it. What is happening here is Babylon. This
Mhm.
is where the three angels' message comes into play, to worship God, the creator, the sovereign of the universe, and give glory to that sovereign of the universe, not to the sovereign you have set up to be the so-called savior of Christianity, which is what his son said, that his father is the savior of Christianity. That is the first angel's message. All right. The second angel's message is what? What the second angel says?
Babylon.
Babylon
It's
is
fallen.
fallen. Okay? Babylon is fallen. And I want you to understand that the three angels' message is parallel in Revelation 18, where the angel says, "Come out of her, my people.
Mhm.
Come out of her." Right now, Adventism leaders, significant leaders in Adventism, including those who have the mind of the entire, global South, have laid or are in bed with Babylon. They are complicit, openly complicit. Why? Is it because of the money? Is it because of the glory? Is it because they're drinking of the wine of the wrath of our prostitution?
Mm.
This is important. Adventism needs to wake up to what the three angels are saying to us today in American society.
Yeah.
All right. And how this society has become Babylon. In fact, Babylon in the Bible, of course, is a representative of, is a symbolic of empire. And empire in the scripture is always an oppressive system. So when you say empire, you're talking about an oppressive system. So my call, long and short, I will leave others to take that up, is if we want to be prophetic, we need to stop using the three angels' message as a marketing ploy
Mm.
and start making the message come alive.
Mm.
It speaks to us as Adventists today.
Mm.
All right.
So powerful, Dr. Hemmings. I completely agree with everything that you're saying. I think the thing that I've been hearing the Lord speak to me about recently, I've been studying particularly the second commandment. But really, I think it's the first three. We oftentimes break them up and say, the first four are love of God and the last six are love of humanity. But I think what is so fascinating is that those first three commandments are really about worship. They're really about who are you posturing your heart, giving your offerings and sacrifices to. And I think the danger of Christian nationalism and the empire, as you've presented it to us, Dr. Hemmings, is that there are people who are worshiping these false gods. And we do not realize that they are false gods. And we are not preaching that they are false gods. And we need to preach that any Christian that is bowing down to this kind of a God, lifting up praise, worship, and honor to this Christian nationalist God, is in fact worshiping an idol. You are worshiping a false deity. You are worshiping an antichrist. You cannot believe that you, just by keeping the Sabbath, are going to prevent yourself from having the mark of the beast on your hand and in your forehead if you are actively worshiping that beast and trying to convince all of us that this is just this truly is God. It is not the reality. And so I think that when we're dealing with these kinds of things, the reason why we need prophetic courage is because in order for us to have any kind of relevance in the community, a community that is postmodern, a community that is becoming more and more secular, in order to convince that community of loving and being in relationship with God, we have to demonstrate to them what that love looks like tangibly. And when I read the books of Genesis to Revelation, I see a God of justice that is not simply enacting a spiritual kind of liberation, a spiritual kind of justice, but a God who is truly enacting very real justice on financial economic exploitation, on actual gender bias, on actual people who are experiencing physical and sexual abuse. And quite frankly, when I even think, there's a situation, and I've been weighing in my mind whether, how to mention it, not to mention it, but I've been made aware of a situation at a local Adventist church where a person uttered the words during church to another member who is a Black member, uttered the words, "Shut the F up, you stupid N-word." 2026, Adventist church. The reason why we are experiencing these things in our churches is because we do not speak, preach, or teach with any kind of courage or authority on these topics. We are allowing MAGA to slip into our congregations. We are allowing racism to sit in an incubator because we are not adequately preparing our pastors to speak to these issues competently and then provide the necessary pastoral care to people that are experiencing racism, not from the outside world, inside our churches. It's not just for you to preach courageously to a administration that is not going to hear you preach. What does it look like to encourage pastors to preach courageously to people that are in your pews that voted for Trump? People in your pews that are racist and bigoted. But because you don't want to be uncomfortable, and because you don't want to disrupt the equilibrium or rock the boat or mess up whatever you got going on with board meeting, you are avoiding necessary conversations. This church avoids necessary conversations about race constantly. And as long as we continue to ignore these things, we're going to have very real hate bias incidents and hate crimes that are taking place in our local congregations, and we are going to continue to not actually even have safe spaces for Black people. Is it even safe? You want to talk about visibility? Is it safe to be Black and Adventist? Is it safe to be Black in the Seventh-day Adventist church? Because I am not certain that every Adventist space is safe for me. And I'm being very honest.
And I think what you mean by that, Claudia, is it safe to be Black in Adventist? Meaning, is it safe to express myself authentically as a Black person rather than,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely about expression, but I don't even think it needs to be expression. If you have the audacity to call me the N-word to my face in the presence of other Black people on the Sabbath day, this has nothing to do with whether or not I get to even worship in my most authentic capacity. You are not making it safe for me to even show up in my humanity, in the skin that I cannot change.
We have, I think, since the Great Disappointment, the kind of idolatry that Claudia and Olive are talking about, it exists in part because since the Great Disappointment, since the Millerites committed the ultimate theological blunder, right? The period of time between 1844 and 1863, that 19 years, Adventism emerges with a certain anxiety about being theologically right. And this anxiety about being theologically right has led to what I call doctrine worship. We worship our doctrine. We don't practice it. We engage in what is called what I call sign worship. We worship the signs, but we don't worship the God who is behind them. I think we have, again, a preoccupation with being right that leads to this kind of worship of what we think is theological knowledge, but ultimately becomes just another way to vindicate white supremacy. The first angel's message that Olive was just talking about is a message that requires us to see this idolatry for what it is and condemn it. But we are so anxious about trying to prove that we're right that we completely abandon right conduct. And so it's okay in the minds of the person, of people like the person who would call somebody the N-word and, utter profanity in church on the Sabbath in front of other people. That's the kind of disposition that is cultivated when our principal objective is not to do righteousness, but is to worship our doctrine because it tells us how right we are. We have a bad habit of worshiping the Sabbath instead of worshiping the God of the Sabbath, right? And we look for, and Pastor Hurst, your question was, what does the Black church's prophetic call look like today? I can tell you what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like a bunch of Adventists sitting around at a potluck trying to point to the signs and say, oh, well, this is going to happen and that's going to happen and then there's going to be a Sunday. That's not what it looks like. You know what it looks like? It looks like all of the organizations outside of the church that we condemn that have actually been engaged in the kind of justice work that we ought to be engaged in. That's the prophetic call of the Black church. And in this historical moment, it looks like, to follow up on Claudia's point, Black people need to start getting involved, right? Need to start getting involved outside of Adventism. Need to start getting involved with local NAACP chapters. I myself, as a lawyer, am looking to get involved in a local NAACP chapter to see what I could do to help with voting rights litigation and things of that nature, right? That's what the Black prophetic call looks like. It looks a lot more like the kind of Black prophetic fire that you get from people from our public intellectuals than it does looking like watching for signs because we're anxious about being right based on some prophecy seminar that we took that completely ignores Black history and completely ignores the denominational account of Revelation 13. So those are my thoughts on that.
I know Dr. Keith wants to add, so let's let Dr. Keith add, and then I want to bounce off of what you all have said to something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to take a collective look in the mirror and to start thinking about where we are and why we're still here. If I'm in a church, in a local congregation, and someone calls me the N-word, either they're gone or I'm gone. And if they ain't gone, I'm not going back there. I'm not going back there. Okay. And if I go back there and insist that I have a place there and this person has a safe place there, then I have to question my sense of worth. I have to question that. I believe that as a Black people in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we've not had the type of discussion that we need to have about our voice when it comes to looking at prophecy. We had white people from Norway and Sweden and England and other places looking at Revelation chapter 13, pointing to Roman Catholicism, looking at other symbols, speaking about apostate Protestantism in the future. Goodness. Yeah, Martin V, Nicholas V, And other popes were the ones who initiated the conquest of Africa. But it was the Methodists, at least the post-1844 Methodists, and it was the Presbyterians and the Anglicans who were trading in slaves. Stop this foolishness about some future apostate Protestantism when they were apostate from the very beginning. Stop it. You know, we have allowed this white construction to control our minds, and we have made ourselves invisible in the prophecy. When we look at Babylon, we're looking for some sort of spiritual application of Babylon. Look at Revelation chapter 18. That's cutthroat, Eurocentric, white supremacist capitalism. Why is it that Zig and Lonnie can see it and we can't?
And the third angel says,
You
resist.
to peddle a message that was created in back rooms to pacify white sensibilities who, when they're looking for a mark of the beast, had to look to the future and couldn't look at those who were sending us to the back of the bus, couldn't look at those who were lynching us. Come on, people, we need to find our voice. We cannot look at these prophecies and say, hey, because Uriah Smith saw it this way. And by the way, Dr. Golden, Uriah Smith and his keys to the prophetic chart, that's when he was bold and prophetic as it relates to Abraham Lincoln. Look at his Daniel Revelation that was published in 1897, a year after Plessy versus Ferguson, and his tone on America has changed. Has changed. And I see someone here, he's popping, this is Darren Stewart, popping a whole bunch of stuff from South America, Ellen White and stuff. And yes, I understand the role that Ellen White plays in the church, but come on, people. We also have to call her out for some of the statements she has made. She cannot get a pass. She cannot get a pass. And it aches me all the time when I see Black folk trying to defend some of the things that she says. I don't know her full heart, but she said some things that were blatantly racist, and we have to call it out. We cannot hide ourselves. We cannot be invisible. We cannot give a pass if we are to move forward, if we are to move forward with integrity. In fact, the message I'm speaking tomorrow, Dr. Emmons, is the state of disunion. The state of disunion. We just had the state of union, but the state
I got a message tomorrow to my friend. May God help me.
And I'm going to take another look at Revelation chapter 13. We look at the disunited states and the disunited Europe, but they're united in one thing, and that one thing is pushing the agenda of white supremacy. And we cannot sit down like everything is okay, because it's not okay. It's not okay. And it's time for Black Adventists to recover their voices. Time for us to say, you have not seen us in your prophecies, but we see ourselves. And we believe that if you are going to be honest about what is in the prophecy, you must see it too. Indeed, James Cone, when he speaks about God being Black, says, listen, white folk, if you want to experience God, you need to become Black too. And as Black people, we have a message for this age, a message for this time, and we cannot continue selling the goods that we've purchased or we've been sold as if there's nothing wrong with it. There's a whole lot that's wrong, and we cannot sit down and be silent.
All right.
Can I just make one very quick point, Pastor Hurst? I promise it won't take long. Just so that we can see just how baked in this racism and anti-Blackness is. When I was professor of philosophy at Walla Walla University, I taught the philosophy of religion. And we read James Cone. And I gave my students an assignment to write a paper in which they defended James Cone's theology of Black liberation against a number of objections, which I listed in the assignment. The amount of pushback that white students gave me was outrageous. They came to me and they said, why would you ask me to defend his view? Why? I can't defend that. I said, wait a minute. I said, how is it okay for me to be required as a Black person studying philosophy to read Plato, Aristotle? I wrote my dissertation on Immanuel Kant, who was notorious
Oh
for
yeah.
his racism. And I said I had to defend Kant, but
That's
I'm a Black person, and Kant, for me, if Kant saw me, he would tell me I'm not rational. I'm outside of reason. Hegel would tell me that Africa has no history, so they can't be part of the world historical process. How is it that I have to do that as a Black person? And I ask you, not for a whole dissertation, I ask you to do one assignment, to write a 3,000 word essay in which you defend a Black theologian against certain objections, and now all of a sudden the sky is falling. That is how baked in. This one student went to my department chair, and my department chair called me. He said, "Tim, what's going on?" I said, "Nothing's going on." My department chair, kudos to him, he sent the student back to me and said, "You better complete your assignment." Right? So hats off to my department chair. But this is the kind of pushback, right, that we get. And if it's that baked in, right, this is how we don't understand. I wish I could be Keith and Olive. I wish I could hear your sermons tomorrow, because a lot of digging has to be done, right, to unearth this kind of hypocrisy. And again, I just think, Keith, what you said is so important. Black Adventism has to find their voice, which the Black Adventist voice is not necessarily an Adventist voice, if you know what I mean. And that
I appreciate that distinction. Wow.
that has to be embraced. So I'm sorry, Pastor Hurst.
No, you're fine. I have a couple of questions. I'm trying to discern which one to go with. I'm going to go with this one based. I want us to look eternal now. And when I say eternal, I mean within us as Black Adventists, the Black church, the Black community. Where have we been invisible, maybe by choice or not by choice? I mean, we talk about forces that marginalize us, but let's look inward. I want us to look inward. Are there arenas, civic arenas, or educational arenas, or cultural arenas, even theological, where the Black church or Black Adventists have chosen to retreat over engagement, and not because they might not necessarily because they lacked conviction, but perhaps maybe it was because of fatigue, maybe it was because of fragmentation, maybe shifting priorities. Where have we disengaged in certain spaces where we should be fully engaged in? Let's talk about from eternal, not what others have infringed upon us for this, as we come, for this section.
I really appreciate. Sorry. Go ahead.
Excuse me, Claudia. I'm sorry, Pastor. Could you? I'm trying to make sure I heard your question correctly. Could you? You went out a little bit for me.
Okay.
Could you restate
basically, where has the Black church been invisible by choice? Where should we have been engaged, but we are not? We talked about how others have infringed on us and how they have looked at us or not seen us. But what about ourselves, be it the Black Adventist church or the Black church as large?
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, there are two things that come to my mind on this. I'll deal with the easier one first. I think, maybe not easier, but I think civically. So most recently, I gave public testimony before a county council that I live within, in opposition to the building of an ICE detention facility here in my county. I was the only Adventist in the room. This particular county is the county that houses the headquarters of the North American Division. Why was I the only Adventist in the room? people then say to me, oh, well, Claudia, we're so proud of you. Like, you can find, I posted the testimony, got close to 20,000 views. Baltimore Sun even clipped it, put me on their joint. Messages, Claudia, the Lord is blessing you to be in rooms to represent us, and we love that. God is so good. And I had to say, God didn't bring me into this room. I walked into the room. It's a public meeting. It's a public meeting, saints, that was advertised, that was put out. Anyone is allowed to make public testimony. You submit your testimony ahead. You know, they're not reviewing the testimony and saying who can and cannot present. Over 70 people submitted testimony to be shared that evening. All 70 of those people made testimony that night. It was a late night. So, like, for me, I think one thing that's very important for me is there's a disconnect, right? We have made ourselves invisible by not participating in the civic process. We do not attend public town halls, public meetings. We are not a part of community organizations. And these are not things that are difficult for us to join. They are free. And every single time I walk in, they're like, Claudia, can you connect us to other Adventists? And I always do, because that is what it's about. It is about increasing our presence in these rooms. And so I think that is a way that we've made ourselves invisible. The second way I think that we do this is regarding intra-racism. I think that Black Americans towards Caribbeans, Caribbeans towards Black Americans, Africans towards Caribbeans, Caribbeans towards Africans, Africans to Black Americans, this triangle of the global Pan-African existence, we are not on one accord. Not only do we not even agree on the same things, quite frankly, we don't even respect each other all the time. And I think something that we don't talk about enough, and I preached about it last week, is this dynamic where Black Americans are quiet about social injustices or issues that are specific and germane to Caribbeans, and Caribbeans are silent about stuff that's specific to Black Americans. And we have these Sabbath potlucks where the Caribbeans gather around the table and talk bad about the Black Americans, and the Black Americans gather around the table and talk bad about the Caribbeans, and everybody gathers to talk bad about the Africans. And I think that our unwillingness to acknowledge that this is even happening, despite the fact that there are people who think I'm Caribbean. So they've said wild stuff to me about Black Americans because they think I'm Jamaican.
Yeah, or they like Jamaican.
See? Or they think I'm, Dominican or a part of the Caribbean islands. I used to get mistaken for Haitian all the time. Listen, I'm honorary. I receive my honorary acceptance into the Caribbean islands. However, I'm just saying, I think that we've got to be honest about the fact that we are secretly discriminating against each other and perpetuating anti-Blackness against each other in ways that, I've got people that are saying stuff like, oh, well, Claudia, only Black Americans should be celebrated during Black History Month. No other Black group. I'm sorry, what? So I think that there are even Black Americans who say, I don't want a Caribbean Sabbath in February. I don't want to hear none of this in February. So I want us to also acknowledge to what you were saying, Pastor Hurst, because this is such a really important thing. We are doing harm to each other that we are not acknowledging and that we are not talking about and that we are not working to rectify. And so we are using white people as a distraction We want to focus on this external white boogeyman, this white knight who is doing something to us, when we are not actually even acknowledging the ways that we have internalized racism in ways that Dr. Burton and Dr. Hemmings have already talked about tonight, but the ways that we have internalized racism and are inflicting it upon each other. And when we begin to heal our communities internally, removed from the white gaze, not thinking about whether or not what they think about us or what they put on the Sabbath school lesson or whatever they're doing on the outside, and really begin focusing on us, ministering to each other, loving each other, dismantling the brokenness that exists between us, then I believe we will be able to build a coalition that is strong enough to bring about real organizational change within this denomination. But right now, Black Adventism is not united. And that is why we have not been successful in moving anything within this denomination regarding Black affairs within the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Man, thank you. Not even, let me just add this. I want to thank Claudia for going to there. I think we so many times in the church are waiting on a statement, a letter, somebody to post something. And what you did is, in the heart of where our North American division is, without a statement, you didn't go representing the church, you went representing our people.
Yep.
And for what was right. And what my thing is, forget us, because we have statements and all they did is roll out a statement from 2 and 3 years ago and still ain't done nothing. So what good is a statement? We have to do something. We have to get on. There are statements are necessary, but without action, faith without work, statement without doing something, what does it get us? And so I want to applaud you even on this show for taking the stand and making the move that you did to go and use your voice, to be a voice for the voiceless, because that's what it's about. That's what we need.
But let's also say this, though. The statement is actually a restatement of our fundamental belief, number 14. And the reason that we can't talk, and the problem I have is we are comfortable, and I think Claudia and a few others said this earlier, violating our fundamental belief 14, which talks about the equality of people, without any consequence for those who violate it. How can pastors, how can anyone who's employed by the church constantly violate the 14th fundamental belief and still work here? In Michigan, where Claudia and I grew up, we had a president who said that Black people cannot pastor white churches.
Yeah.
And he held to that. And not one, and his own employees told me what the president said. And I'm sitting up here saying, why can't you say something? Well, we can't do that over here, or we don't have that type of freedom. I said, what do you mean? If you're called by God and you know this is wrong, blatantly wrong, and you're going along to get along because you're afraid of this bully, this Goliath, that you're not willing to speak truth to power, something's wrong with this picture. So I agree with Claudia. We have created a haven. We have created a safe place, a welcoming environment where we allow these blatant racist remarks and application to exist within our church, and no one say a mumbling word. Not a mumbling word. It's just swept under the rug, or we handled it. It's a personnel matter. We can't talk about it anymore. And the same stuff happens over and over and over again. And I'm all about the mission. Everybody wants to talk mission, mission, mission. I'm all about the mission. But if the people implementing the mission are corrupt, how can the mission be effective? And that's the problem I have. We're always trying to skirt around the issue, change the narrative, spin the story, but not attack the problem. Tim does this good job of talking about the Kilgore policy, and how it existed before we got Plessy versus Ferguson, and how it still existed after Brown versus Board of Education. You know, we talked about before the past, and you guys have heard the show. You read those books. We type them, we put them in the chat. Read it. Don't listen to us. Read the books. Protest Progress, Seventh-day Adventists and the Civil Rights Movement, The Righteous Rebel, Elder Dudley's books, Charles Bradford, Elder Bradford book about Sabbath roots in Africa, Change Agents by Douglas Morgan. It's all right there. Adventist Fundamentalism by Michael Campbell. It's right there. But we tend to change the truth that has been well documented and we don't want to address because we call it culture wars. I mean, you hear idiotic statements like a woke conference is a broke conference.
Yep.
I mean, this is the type of stuff. I am a Christian nationalist. Project 2025, it's a mere policy proposal. We don't have to worry about it. And it's these third-party ministries who say these type of stuff, put it in mainstream, and let's face it, they benefit from the mega people because they feel the church has lost its way, and they are getting their money. And so you see the tide dropping in these conferences, going to these, let's just say, mega believing ministries because they believe them, because they feel they represent mega, and there's no consequence. And that is a problem. But we're going to cater to our people anyway, and we'll pray for the George Floyd, but we're not going to take any action because we have people on both sides. And this is why we have a problem. We'll never be able to rally around mission when we don't have love for God or our brothers and sisters in Christ.
Yeah.
One of the things that Black Adventism has done, regrettably, is that it has assimilated many of the characteristics of white Adventism, which is one of them is a willful absenteeism from social and political life unless it affects us.
Correct.
If there is some pending legislation that will trouble our ability to claim a religious accommodation in the workplace so we can keep the Sabbath, we are front and center. But yet, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is under attack in the Supreme Court of the United States. The court will make a ruling on it later this year. In 2013, the court already ruled 13 years ago that we don't really need federal oversight of elections. We don't need it anymore, right? And the Black church hasn't said anything about that. The Black Adventist church hasn't said anything about that, right? And meanwhile, and this is what really troubles me, every Seventh-day Adventist today benefits from the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which it guarantees religious freedom in the workplace. So if you're a Seventh-day Adventist today, no matter what your race or ethnicity, if you have a Sabbath problem on the job, I got news for you. The church is involved in politics. The church has always been involved in politics. So when you request that Sabbath accommodation letter, you are invoking Black history. Why are you invoking Black history? Because the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the result of the SCLC, the Alabama Christian Movement, and a number of other organizations that in part sponsored the March on Washington and pressed the Johnson administration to sign that civil rights bill. And guess who opposed it? Guess who opposed the protest movements? Guess who threatened Black pastors with church discipline if they aided or abetted that movement in any way? The General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists.
Wow.
It's in Samuel London's book, okay? You had the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists essentially saying, we don't want you involved in protest movements on the front end. And now the Seventh-day Adventist Church benefits on the back end from the results of the very social movement that they opposed.
Mm-hmm.
That is the height of hypocrisy. We, Black Adventists, a lot of us, are reaping where we have not sown.
Wow.
And that is problematic. At some point, we have to understand that we cannot be selective in our political involvement. When I was baptized into the Adventist Church, right after I got baptized, I became, not long after, a couple of years later, I became a lawyer, passed the bar, and I found myself as a public defender in Philadelphia, deeply immersed in constitutional issues of arrest, search, and seizure, the right to counsel, etc. And I couldn't figure out what the problem was, because there were all these major constitutional issues that were of great concern to everyone else except Adventists, because we only care about religious freedom in the First Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
We don't care about any of the other constitutional amendments
Mm-hmm.
that matter to others. We only care about it ourselves. So we have a sense of willful absenteeism because we assume a lot of the identity that comes from white Adventism, which is a hypocrisy that only wants to be involved in social and political life when our interests are implicated. Black Adventism, regrettably, has assimilated that and behaved in a similar manner. And that, I think, is really, really regrettable. We have to Keith's point, if we're going to find our voice, we have to excavate our history and understand what's really going on. Understand, as Keith said, that Revelation 13 doesn't refer to an event. It refers to a systemic condition. It refers to a problem. You up there looking for a sign, but it's been happening.
Yep.
It's been, when George Floyd had the knee on his neck, that's the American government's knee has been on Black people's necks since 1619. It's been happening before there was America, right? That's even before the July the 4th, 1776. Before then, the habits and practices of white supremacy are so baked in that we don't even see that when we ignore history, we're supporting our own demise.
Timothy, as you talk, reflecting once more on Jerome's challenge regarding our invisibility, our culpable invisibility. And I put it down to this. I believe that the Jesus movement has been depoliticized and replaced with an imperialist political Christianity. One that continues to fragment to the point where we have over 44,000 denominations, according to some estimates, around the world, each of which claims to be carrying truth. And within these denominations, we have these little subsets of clubs where these churches exist just for the sake of feeding each other, of celebrating their cultural difference, of somehow finding isolation from the world. But when we look at the reality of the Jesus movement, I'm thinking about a meeting I attended last year at the American Academy of Religion on the Black Panthers and Black theology. And as we entered the discussion phase, someone asked the question, where was the Black church? To which I responded, we're asking where the Black church was because we have a hard time seeing the Black Panthers as the Black church.
Mercy. Wow.
And so when we look at the way in which we often pull out of justice initiatives, justice imperatives, I believe it's easy for us to do because we've bought into this fragmented understanding of Christianity that has replaced the Jesus movement, where each of the ecclesiae, that's the Greek word that we translate church, which is not the best translation for that word, ecclesia. Each of them was a chapter, just like a chapter of the Black Panthers, a chapter, a chapter, a chapter. All of them existing to aid in the revolution. So when we look at what denominationalism has done, denominationalism, particularly with Adventists, has pulled us into this notion of some sort of spiritual superiority, where we have this inner knowledge, just like these secret groups that gets us closer to the kingdom. In fact, gets us into the kingdom. Everyone else is left out because we don't understand that that's not what it's all about. And so when we have folk from different parts of the world, particularly in the Black church, from the Caribbean and thing coming over here, they're going to critique, they're going to keep in their silos because they have not been taught what it means to be a member of the Jesus movement. When if outside of the church, look at the Black Panthers, Stokely Carmichael, the Guardian, of Islam, Malcolm X, son of a Grenadian. Look at the nation of Islam today.
In fact, Keith, what's interesting is we tend to misidentify Black nationalism with the Nation of Islam and the Black Panther Party, when the reality is the first Black nationalists in the United States were Christians.
Exactly.
If you go back to the 1830s and you study Reverend Lewis Woodson, and you study Henry Highland Garnett, they all spoke in Black nationalist terms and they were Christians. So we have to broaden our understanding of what Black nationalism is and stop almost sort of reflexively in a childlike way that wants to avoid social responsibility, say, oh, well, that's the Nation of Islam and that's the Black Panthers. No, these are Black Christians who in the 19th century were looking at the world. I mean, a lot of people think, Malcolm X is radical, right? Henry Highland Garnett advocated armed resistance to end slavery. In fact, at the Negro Convention in Philadelphia in 1843, the question was up, how are we going to, as a people, end slavery? Is it going to be through moral suasion or armed resistance? And Frederick Douglass advocated the latter. Henry Highland Garnett advocated the former. And it came down to a vote, and moral suasion won over by one vote.
My.
Jeez.
By one vote. Okay. And these are Black Christians in the 19th century. So let's not get it twisted. The Black Panther Party and the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X, they are operating against the backdrop of a tradition of Black radical thought that is uniquely Christian. Right?
Absolutely.
I don't think we should forget that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to go back to David Walker. We have to go back to Nat Turner.
That's right.
And again, on this front, we're looking at Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, which was headquartered in New York. Which if we look even at Adventism, James K. Humphrey, and his role in pulling the folk together and pulling the masses together. But I think, again, this whole mental blanqueamiento, this whole idea of thinking white is one of those things that is hindering our ability to pull together in a way that we're really making a difference. But we also have to understand that even as it's been a challenge to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, remember it was a challenge to the Black Baptists too, which is why we have the missionary.
Correct.
The missionary Baptists, because Jackson and others, they were like, King, we don't like what you're doing. Okay,
Absolutely.
even our beloved Gardner Taylor was on the
Yep.
side of the Gaines King initially. All right.
Yep.
And again, that's the reason why I get back to the whole thing. The Jesus movement was a political movement that basically heralded another kingdom, another. I know Dr. Amos doesn't like the word, another empire, but a good empire.
If I may say so, Keith, the Jesus movement, if you talk about the third angel's message, where it says,
Uh-huh.
here is the hupomone. What is that? Resistance.
Come on.
Here's the resistance of the saints. Those who see the commandment of God and have the testimony of Jesus. Now we have put a doctrine around that, but we have to go to Luke 4:18-20 to find out what the testimony of Jesus is. That the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me. That is the spirit of prophecy. That right there is the spirit of prophecy. And so I think, and people like Marcus Garvey was preaching the third angel's message. Here is the resistance of the saints. Resist.
Absolutely.
Mercy.
And I would like to say, because I have to go, Marcus Garvey, it's time we hear him again, because he's the one who tried to bring the entire Black diaspora together into a way of self-knowing, self-understanding, and self-value, self-determination. You know, Marcus Garvey, an architect of the Harlem Renaissance. Can you imagine that? He came from Jamaica, but Jamaica was not important to him. It's his Blackness and the African diaspora that was important to him. And so I'd like us to invoke the voice of Marcus Garvey again, and invoke the voice as a Black church. We are the conscience of this church.
Wow.
I think we should hold our corner as a conscience. Preach third angel's message. Let us not preach a canned doctrine. Let us preach true resistance to corruption, to empire, to what is going on in America right now.
Thank you.
God bless you all.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Dr. Hemmings. Amazing.
We want to kind of conclude our conversation. It's been so rich. I mean, many times people come on the broadcast and they suggest, oh, they're so negative about the church, or why are they so hard upon the church? And they don't realize this same church that we're talking about today is the same church Jesus was referencing biblically in the Bible. And there's a lot of similarities that have continued through the course of history, that they're still present today. So to end on, as they say, a quote unquote positive note, I say positive, but I want to say an open and transparent note, because that's more honest and reflective. Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? That was the question Dr. King asked. So let's just ask this question here. Where do we go from here? As you think about what was said, what was exchanged, some highlights, some triggers that you might have experienced, where do we go from here? And as a suggestion to people who are listening or will come back and watch the broadcast later, you know, where do we go from here? And share your reflections on that and how people can get engaged and involved. Eddie Goodman said in the chat, you know, we'd have great conversations at CJC. A lot of powerful statements are made, but what's the action plan? And I would submit the action plan is also an individual commitment. Every time we look at action, we always talk about groups, but I can make my own commitment, and I can hold myself responsible for that commitment. So as you contemplate your answer, where do we go from here? Also include, and how am I going to hold myself accountable in doing that? Whoever wants to go first.
Maybe I would say this too. If we just, not just where we go from, what's one action, Woody? Maybe we put, what's one action we can take, you know, in the immediate future? You know, not just, okay, but what's an action that can be attached to that, where we go from here? All right, I'll turn it over to the panel.
I'm going to let Dr. Golden and Dr. Burton close out, because those are the mic drop gentlemen, so I'll go quickly. I think what I would want to really encourage folks to do is to immediately after the sun sets tomorrow, because I'm sure you're going to think it's breaking the Sabbath, what I'm saying. But when the sun sets on tomorrow night, look up who are your county officials, who's on the county or the city council where you live in. What are the commissions and boards that exist within that county? More than likely, those commissions and boards have vacancies that you can serve on. And you typically just send an interest letter to whatever commission or board you're particularly interested in. So, for instance, if you're a pastor and you're watching this, a lot of times there will be an interfaith advisory council or an interfaith board or an interfaith commission. You can reach out to your county or city government about joining that. If there are no openings for that, then what you can do is you can start making notes of when those public meetings take place, and you could just simply begin attending those public meetings. Maybe there's a what we call a food council that brings together a variety of leaders, folks that work with the food banks in your county or in your city, and they're doing a variety of programs or need a variety of volunteers. Do that. Take note. What is the legislation that your city or county council is actually hearing? And bring your voice to the table about that, right? Don't just show up when it's when we find out that it's an ICE and detention center, right? Something that we were talking about that evening was, well, how did it get through the first time back in 2023 when they submitted the proposal? Why didn't we know when they submitted and approved the proposal that it was an ICE detention facility? Why are we only now in 2026 opposing it now that they're in the building process, right? A lot of times we get involved a little too late in various things. So I really encourage you, sign up for your county executive or your mayor's newsletter. Oftentimes they'll release a weekly or a monthly newsletter with a variety of events, programs, meetings, town halls, things that you can attend where you're going to learn more information about what's going on. And remove from just the civic engagement portion, I strongly encourage you to look for different community organizations. So one that I think is a great one to be a part of is the NAACP. I also think of the Urban League or the League of Women Voters, or I think of Urban Alliance. I think of there's another interfaith one that I think it's called Faith and Democracy. There are a lot of different organizations that we can join, be a part of, go to their meetings, begin to make connections so that we are tangibly on the ground when things happen. When the march takes place, they're sending you the information so that you can go and participate as well. So that would be my ask, is that folks take it upon themselves to really kind of research in your particular area, in your particular neck of the woods, right? In Maryland, there are several offices of human rights, there are offices of equity and human rights throughout the state. Those are what we call EEO offices. I know for a fact, because I've been to the international human rights agencies and am in conversation with them, that there is a human rights commission or a human rights office in just about every state. Are you connected to the one that is in your state and attending their programming and attending their meetings? Are you aware of ways that you could support them or learn? They are typically the ones that are tracking the legislation that you should watch for and that you can give testimony to, whether that be at the county, the city, or even the state level. So that would be my kind of tangible suggestion for folks to do some homework this weekend and find out where you can get plugged in.
Excellent suggestions, Claudia. Very practical and doable. And I think it highlights how many people really don't know that they don't get a lot of public comments. You get the story in the media, but the reality is if you live in their district, you get 5 to 10 to 15 people calling that district office. Yep. It's like a tsunami.
Absolutely.
And they tend to pay attention, but we don't understand, as the Golden State Warriors say, there's strength in numbers. there's strength in numbers. So thank you for those very practical and tips that everybody can do if they would just take the initiative. Keith?
Yeah, I believe as we reflect on this topic for tonight, the whole idea of invisibility, that we need to leave here not asking the question, do they see us, but do we see us?
Wow.
Do we appreciate our own voice? Do we appreciate our own talents? Do we appreciate our own ability to theologize and to dissect? Do we appreciate us to the point where we're not only looking at us who have somehow insulated ourselves in this mythical notion of remnant, but do we see us in the communities? Do we see us to the point where we are willing, get into Dr. Hurst's part of the question over here, where we are willing to challenge the way in which we do Sabbath school in our churches, so that we have 1 or 2 classes that deal with financial literacy for the community, where we have classes where we're encouraging folk in our community to pool resources together to buy staples in bulk. You know, there are things that we can do when we start seeing us and realize that Marvin Gaye and What's Going On was able to see us better than any of us who hold membership in our churches could see us. And so, hey, that's one thing for us to do. Listen to What's Going On again and listen to it, not so that we can groove, but so we can hear the sermon that's being preached in every single song. And from that, ask ourselves the question, as followers of Jesus Christ, how can we make our places of worship relevant to the community? And how can we be actionable in empowering the community to leverage their resources in a way in which generational wealth can not only be a figment of one's imagination, but can indeed be reality?
Thank you. Tim?
Several things that we can do. One, we, as Black Adventists, do not allow white Adventism to shame you out of your history. Do not allow white Adventism to shame you out of your authentic cultural expressions. Be yourself. The German philosopher Nietzsche said the most difficult thing for many people to do is become who they are, right? Be you, be who you are, be what you are, be Black and be proud of it. And don't run from it. And don't let a whitewashed version of the gospel convince you that your history doesn't matter. Don't let a whitewashed version of the Christian gospel, an ersatz version of the Christian gospel, convince you that anything Black must be bad. Don't adopt white hegemonic standards and internalize them in our community. Don't be selective, in other words, in your involvement in social and political life. You don't get involved only when it benefits you. You get involved when it even doesn't, when it concerns the neighbor. That's when you get involved, right? The Pharisee asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" When he asked Jesus that question, he was expecting Jesus to give an abstract definition of neighbor, like, oh, the neighbor is someone who doesn't live any more than 50 paces from your front door, with hopes that he could exclude himself. In fact, when you read Luke 10, it says in parentheses that the Pharisee asked that question trying to justify himself. Yeah. And what Jesus ends up doing is he ends up telling him this story, which leads to my next point of what we need to do. He ends up telling this person a story in which not only is the Pharisee disappointed, but his moral obligation is now heightened to an astonishing degree. Because now he realizes that the neighbor is anyone in need, and that a person is a person that you think is a dog, a Samaritan, is more likely to help the neighbor than you are, right? And so at this point, I think another thing we need to do, and I'll close on this, Keith, when you talked about Marvin Gaye, it reminds me of James Cone's The Cross and the Lynching Tree, where he talks about Billie Holiday.
Yeah.
Right? It's easy for us to sit back and condemn the, Hollywood and entertainers, and we got all kind of conspiracy theories about people. Don't let white Adventism deny the power of Black art and what Black art can do politically and socially, whether it's Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, or Billie Holiday, Strange Fruit. Yeah. It's not an accident that artists have played a pivotal role in Black liberation struggles. And it didn't surprise us, because here we are, Christians who claim to serve a creator, and yet we have no respect for artistic creativity.
You're talking.
We are going to be we're supposedly celebrating God's creative work every Sabbath, and we have no respect for Black art. That has to stop. And I think if we can disallow the influence of white Adventism from shaming us out of our history, from adopting white standards of selective political involvement, if we can put a stop to that, and if we can embrace Black arts, if there's a group in your church that wants to start a drama ministry, don't frown on it, embrace it, because it's through the aesthetic that we engage politics most constructively in ways that can lead to meaningful change. So that's my thoughts, my closing thoughts.
All right. Now, I promised them I would tell them where you all are preaching tomorrow. Keith, where are you at?
I'm at the Cornerstone Church in Brooklyn, New York.
Tim?
I am not preaching tomorrow, but if I get my act together, I will tune in to watch Keith on a stream.
All right, Claudia?
I'm not preaching tomorrow either. The Lord is good.
Amen. Hurst?
I'm not preaching tomorrow either. I have a guest speaker at my church tomorrow.
Come on with the rest. Look at all of this Sabbath rest on this panel.
Right. I do have to say, while we are still live, that Pastor Hurst, the first time I met him was when he spoke at my church years ago in Philadelphia. And I will never forget the sermon that he preached. It was titled, "Who Let the Dogs In?"
My God.
And my goodness, what a message that was. And so, Pastor, your church is not as well off as they would be if you were speaking tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you for your ministry and all that you do.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, this has been CJC Conversations with your co-hosts, Pastor Jerome Hurst and Edward Woods III of the Conscience and Justice Council. We love to thank our great and talented and never have to worry about getting them to say anything guests, Claudia Allen, Timothy J. Golden, Keith Burton, and Olive Hemmings for coming and being a great sounding board, as well as a great source of information and knowledge. Next month, the Conscience and Justice Council will be doing a full-blown symposium for women in ministry in honor of Women's History Month. And we're looking forward to this taking place on Friday, March 27th at 8:00 p.m. Once again, Women in Ministry will be featuring Dr. Ella Simmons, retired General Conference Vice President, and many others. So stay tuned for the announcement in 2 weeks, but you will see a broad perspective of women in ministry. And just like we have diversity in men, we have diversity in women, and I'm here for all of it and want to encourage you to be here and supportive of that as well. Absolutely. Once again, we answered the question, are Blacks visible in America and in the church, you heard the answers, but most importantly, the challenge. What are you going to do to ensure that your voice is heard? What are you going to do instead of just talking about it and raising an issue? What are you going to do in the corner that you are? Because if you look at what happens globally, it always starts locally. So when you're silent in the boardroom, shame on you. When you're looking out for self-interest in the boardroom, shame on you. We are all created in the image and likeness of God, and we have a responsibility to speak for all of God's children, not just Black children, white children, brown or yellow, all of God's children, so that we can see his face in peace. God bless you. Have a happy Sabbath, and we look forward to you tuning in next month.